Welcome. Today we are looking at the Trio protocol from the viewpoint of the daytime, what's happening in the daytime, our daytime activities, and of course the evening time activities, and the importance of understanding the protocol from both side of the coin, both side of the activities. Um, Let me see if I could get this out here. Now, when we look at the Trio protocol, we are looking at this important framework for development of human beings, the physicalities of the human, the body's systems and how they function based upon chronology of time. So we look into the daytime, which today we would look at point number 2, stimulation. Once you own a copy of this Trio protocol, you would be able to follow along, and this lecture goes in sync with the basic understanding of point number 2. There are 3 videos in this series which explains the entire 4 videos, one video explaining the entire summative framework, video number 1 explaining the body, video number 2, which is this video, explaining stimulation on the body, and video number 3 focuses on key nutrition in the evening. Now, video number 2, which is this video, is highly focused on the concept of what is happening in the body during the day. We are not too concerned right now with what we are physically doing during the day. We are concerned as to what is happening, signaling the cells. Now, the body, as you saw in video number 1, is made up of cells, and the cells are actually made up of different organelles, that's how it's spelled, but organelles. And it is those organelles that are doing the do in the back, in the unseen world. It is those little creations that really and truly controls the humans. So in the day, one of the things we look for is to dive down into the body, zoom into the body, get microscopic. When we pass the body, we get into this place called the cells. And we see now, inside the cell, just like a house, multiple people, or more like a bank, multiple set of activities are happening in the day. But we do see the vault-based activity. We see some activity that is not happening in the day. So we have put our observational attention on the ones that are happening in the day. And we see the activities happening in the day surrounding that of the mitochondria. They are the ones who are creating energy. They are the ones who are consuming and transcribing, or they are the ones that are taking glucose, fatty acid, lactate, and other substrates from the bloodstream, which came through the cell walls and entered. They are now consuming these substrates, exchanging it for something called ATP. As we look closer, we see that whole process is a process that is basically a stimulation on the mitochondria to convert these substrates, glucose being major number 1, like 80-90% is glucose, converting it to ATP. Then you have fatty acids, you have ketone bodies, you have others, but they are all converting to ATP. And so in the day, what we are doing, we are basically consuming products that will lead to the digestion system, providing the small intestine with a high quantity of glucose molecules. You have to ask yourself, in all honesty, whether you believe in science, or you believe in the unseen, or you believe in just what you believe in, what foods provide you with the glucose molecule? You do not have to go and list a whole bunch of foods or a bunch of processed items in your supermarket. You would quickly come to realization that once it comes from a plant, save and apart from the herbs, the herbal plants, you are digesting these plant-based products to create glucose in your body. So glucose will leave the small intestine and rush through the liver, up to the portal vein there, up to the main circulatory pipes, and get to those cells in the body through the different organs. It's a wonderful process because that is what we have to do. Now we look deeper and we notice in the time when outside is gloomy, the mitochondria are not active. When the state of play is at night, the mitochondria has very less activity. But when outside is shiny and bright and sunny and you are sparking, the mitochondria are very active. They are changing glucose, they are moving glucose into ATP. So here we are in the day, stimulating the body or not stimulating the body, or sitting there and thinking that we are not doing anything, so we eat glucose and no stimulation is happening. Actually, stimulation is happening at the cellular level, because mitochondria would either be forced to be stimulated, and the good stimulation of the tissues would be things like the exercise, the red light therapy, that's being in the sunlight or even getting red light, massage, cool water bathing, activities of all sorts, which you would find a whole bunch of it down here. And then of course you would add your activities that you are performing. Everything that we are doing during the day leads to some form of stimulation, and that basically is either it is good, or good in the sense that it is causing the mitochondria to consume sugar and make ATP, consume glucose or fatty acids or whatever substrate that is coming in through the blood, consuming it and converting it to ATP. That is a good thing. Or is it? Now, when we look deeper at glucose consumption in the process, if the glucose is coming in lap and cut, as we usually say in the Caribbean, in big quantities, in such a quantity that it's forcing the mitochondria to perform its duty in a period where it just cannot take its time. It's forced. The mitochondria is basically forced to just, let's say, cut and chew. It doesn't take its time. Let's say you are eating something and you can't even take your time to chew and swallow. That happens to our mitochondria when we stuff it with glucose, even in the day when the mitochondria or the mitochondria is most active, or supposed to be most active. Because we are pumping ourselves with glucose molecules, the mitochondria of all the cells in all the tissues and organs, they are now being pumped with these glucose molecules from the blood serum into the cells for the mitochondria to consume in such a short space of time that they don't do a perfect job in the whole creation of ATP cycle. We don't have to get into the science here. This is just a story, and this story is supposed to resonate with most people who likes to listen to stories. And so in this story, the mitochondria are pumped with this glucose. They become so overwhelmed that they basically take one bite and they have to pass the rest out. So you have, of course, the excrement, which is the carbon dioxide and water. That's fine. That's fine. A little acidic, pass through the lymphatic system, get to you for you to pass out as urine. Fine. But then down the road, we see a different excrement, which is like ROS, reactive oxygen species, being created from that process. The glucose burning process, as usually you say, but it is really the glucose exchange process to ATP. And this reactive oxygen species has to be tailored or tampered down. And so the body at this time, or the mitochondrial process, is looking for a bit of vitamin C. Now you just had a piece of bread which has no vitamin C, so the glucose came in all by itself. Or you had some soft drink which has no vitamin C, so the glucose came in by itself. Or you had some refined food which did not have vitamin C, so the glucose came in by itself. So the mitochondria now has a set of garbage that starts piling up and piling up. Hence, we go back to nature and we start saying, well, when we eat a fruit, yes, we get glucose, we get fructose. Let's say we get fructose. Yes, we get fructose. That is processed by the liver, fine. But when we look into the glucose pathway, we see the mitochondria eating glucose, and then it says, oh, you brought some vitamin C. And the vitamin C adds some kind of electrons or something to the ROS to kind of tamper it down and make it better. And then the vitamin C says, I want a little help for myself, so I look for vitamin B, water soluble type, and the whole story goes down and down. That is nutrition. That is what happens in the day when you eat whole plants, which is why we would emphasize in the day. Of course, you are feeding the mitochondria, mainly feeding the mitochondria, and that doesn't mean that you have other little things happening. Of course, little other things happening, but they are very much on the low. Mitochondria is on the high. You are feeding mitochondria with glucose, but not only glucose has to be substrately provided. In this story, you have to provide vitamin C. So it is important to understand when we go to the great places and we buy these great nice things and we realize that they are refined, we have to say to ourselves, common sense is we should grab some vitamin C through in our body ever so often. or whether we squeeze some limes or something high in vitamin C and take it ever so often, because the glucose would go into those mitochondria, and down the road we have a lot of reactive oxygen species, which ultimately would lead to us becoming a little bit more in the problems. Now let's continue this story. So on this side of the fence, number two, the Trio protocol is saying when we are in the day, regardless of what you think you are doing, you may not want to hear the word stimulation, but the word stimulation is the key word. You are stimulating your body, whether it's by singing, dancing, shouting, walking in your office, arguing with your friends, whether you are hiking, whether you are doing some type of aerobics, whether you are skiing or stretching, yawning, singing, whatever you are doing, it's a stimulation on the body. And a stimulation on the body in the day is what is expected, and that is what the mitochondria is there to do, to give you ATP so that you could continue to stimulate your body. And the more you stimulate your body during the day with things like exercise and yoga and walking and activity, better for you in the daytime, because you are basically saying, mitochondria, go ahead and consume glucose. You are active, let me keep you active, let me put you in the sun. You become more active because you get a little red light stimulation. We are walking, so more oxygen, more glucose flows, and you are being very good at stimulating yourself, and you are happy. Of course, you don't have to supply glucose all the time. There are times when you want to supply ketones during the period of staying away from glucose. To supply different substrates like ketones and fatty acids, and the same mitochondria bonds them. Of course, when you supply ketones and fatty acids, the problem is, or the good thing is, you don't get this ROS being created down the road as much as with the glucose. So hence why it is important to understand that yes, in the day you could feed yourself something of fats like eggs and those kind of diets, which would lead to the production of ketone bodies, and they would provide less outputs of ROS. Again, folks, all that I'm saying here is just giving you a story. There is nothing about what I'm saying here that is scientific. This is just entertainment. So in this story, we found that the mitochondria is what works in the day. The mitochondria consume glucose, so therefore if you are eating a plant-based diet in the day, you might be okay. But if you are eating a plant-based diet that is void of vitamin C, you are also considering yourself down the road of creating many reactive oxygen species, which would ultimately be the death and damage of our cells. Why? Because plants are the key suppliers of the glucose molecules. Refined foods are stripped of vitamin C and they keep all the glucose. Glucose is the substrate that goes to feed the mitochondria in the day. Now, why is he emphasizing so much this word day? By now, you would realize that if I mention the word night, you would understand that that same mitochondria begins to go down into a state of smaller or lower activity. So if you had an activity level measure of the mitochondria in the day, you would say on a normal day when rain is falling, mitochondria activity is 50%. On a day when the sun is shining, it is 75%. On a day when the sun is shining and I'm outside walking and doing something, it goes up to 80%. And if I push my body in the gym, it goes up to 90%. Mitochondria is moving, and activities of mitochondria and the whole body system is changing as we go along, based on increased activity, based on light and stuff like that. So it means that you start thinking, okay, glucose, mitochondria, plants, glucose, mitochondria, plants, glucose, mitochondria. That's the pathway. Plants digest to glucose, glucose goes to the mitochondria, and of course mitochondria activity on glucose leads to ROS as a byproduct that causes us to have some issues. But you also say good plants, whole plants, has vitamin C, which helps with some of the issues, to tamper down the issues, and it comes with things like folate, vitamins B, which would help tamper down certain issues going down the road. You keep this framework in your mind and you say, okay, I understand why it is important to be active in the day, because I do recognize I'm supporting my mitochondria's health, because the mitochondria could be showered with a lot of glucose, and if you are not active, then you are not helping the mitochondria consume the glucose faster and faster. But then on the flip side, you have to ask yourself, so how is all this glucose getting there? Well, you watch backwards and you see it comes from the cell, and there are trillions of cells in one organ. And you watch backward from the cells and you see it comes from the tissues. and you watch a little bit upward and you realize it's coming from the organ. And you watch a little bit upward and you realize, hey, it's just really a little copper pipe, a little fine copper pipe, maybe called a capillary, that is bringing in all this glucose. And then you watch a little deeper and you say, hey, this little capillary goes back to this big copper pipe called the circulatory or blood system. A copper pipe that has many things in it, just floating around and just bringing all this glucose. And then you watch a little back and then you see the liver there, kind of silent, fold his arms. And then you watch a little past the liver and you realize there is a pipe coming from somewhere down the road up to the liver, and it's flooded with glucose. And you watch deeper and you realize that pipe connects to another pipe called the small intestine. And it seems like the small intestine is broken. It's just flowing and flooding your body with glucose molecules. And you look up the small intestine and you see the stomach doesn't have anything in it, because you ask a question, what's going on there? It's supposed to be acidic, it's not too acidic. So you dive through that acidic stomach and you come up the esophagus and you realize nothing is there. And you reach to your mouth and you realize, oh, I'm eating some great plant products. I'm eating some rice and quinoa. I'm eating plants. And when the plants hit the stomach, it doesn't stay too long. It goes into the small intestine for carbohydrate digestion, and that's where the glucose molecules are originating from. Plants are a source of glucose. So you are wise enough now to know that when you eat plants, you are supplying glucose. The difference between a plant, a whole plant, and a Coca-Cola is that one would flood the glucose like a broken well springing up, and one would flood your body with glucose over time, taking its time, trickling the amount of glucose, very steady and slow, wonderful. So we go for whole plants in the day. At this time, this is video number 2. We understand in the day we are feeding the mitochondria, we are supporting the mitochondria. Glucose could be used in the day. Specifically, if we are very active, we could be consuming glucose. Do we need to consume all these carbohydrates, which means we are consuming all this glucose, which means we are consuming all these plants to get glucose molecules? Yes and no. Yes and no, depends on you. Glucose should be supplementing based on your activity. In fact, you should think about it like if you are really active, then you might take a little carbohydrates to spur you on, a little glucose molecules. Remember the time you're running the 10K, take a little glucose water. So glucose should be like a supplement, which means plants should be like a supplement, because where the main source of glucose is coming in our diet? From plants. Where is the alternative source of glucose? From the liver. Very well controlled. And if you don't have glucose, ketone bodies are there. Fatty acids could be there. Lactate could be there. And there are others we don't know about. They could be there. So on this protocol here, we are asking ourselves in this story, if we are so desirous in the day of creating the best atmosphere for the mitochondria, what atmosphere that must be? Well, we must create the atmosphere that has a steady flow of small amounts of glucose that is consistently good, that the mitochondria could burn, take its time and burn, to lead to less reactive oxygen species coming from the glucose burning. Well, I use the word glucose burning, but that's not the right word. The glucose conversion to ATP process. The one that would create the less ROS, and think about ROS like you having a old diesel car that leads to black smoke. That's the Caribbean. I know other countries don't have that challenge. In the Caribbean, when you see a person pass with a diesel vehicle, you have to hide because the smoke is black. So you are looking for your glucose to burn without having so much of black smoke, which is the ROS, reactive oxygen species. So overconsumption of glucose in the day is as bad as consuming any glucose sources in the evening, where the mitochondria are now taming themselves down, calming themselves down, going to rest. In video number 3, we will look at the story of the mitochondria going to rest, ribosomes taking over, and other guys supporting the ribosomes, for they are the guys who comes out at night to heal the body. Thank you for listening to this story, and share it if you feel like you have learned something from this story. Apply it to your own lives, change your ways, and become better.